Hello, everyone. Today, we are joined by Emily Savino, CEP. She's the head of Industry Relationships and Thought Leadership, Fidelity Stock Plan Services. And Emily is a frequent speaker at equity compensation events and a past president of the Silicone Valley Chapter of the NASPP, and a member of NASPP and GEO and NCEO as well. So welcome, Emily, and thanks for coming to our Learn from the Leaders series today. I understand that in the last year that Fidelity has undertaken some very interesting research, and that you did a survey of participants and something about how gender and generation impacts perceptions of equity compensation. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about what you discovered.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me. This is one of my favorite topics, so I never turn down an opportunity to talk about it. So indeed, we completed our participant research, which is something that we actually complete on a biannual basis. So every other year, we undertake a large study to understand more about what our participants are thinking. And to be honest, at Fidelity, we are big fans of data and research, and we measure everything. And we do lots and lots of measurement off of our record-keeping data. We sit on a huge trove of record-keeping data around equity compensation. We understand participant behaviors. We know what they're doing with that equity. We do a lot of studies and analysis of what we have on our record-keeping platform. And that's really rich data. But I always feel like there's a little bit of the story that's missing, because part of the story of equity compensation, I believe, is kind of trapped in the heads of our participants. And we can, observe what they're doing. We can study their behaviors, their known behaviors. But part of the story really, I believe, is what they're thinking about it. So that's why we are committed to understanding the whole participant and not just studying what they're doing, but asking them questions about it as well. And so that's the basis for our participant research, which we do every other year. It's a very, very long research report. You'll be glad to know we're not going to go through all 168 pages today, but I'm going to pick a couple of my favorite topics that I want to talk about. And before we jump in, I do want to say that every time we do this research, we sort of have a new theme that we look at, because we ask the same basic questions, but we always take a little bit of a different angle on it each time. And for our most recent research, the angle that we really wanted to study deeper was gender and generation. And we historically had done cuts of the data by gender and by age, but in the past we had done that across the entire participant set. And this year when we did it, what we really wanted to do was to compare participants who were more similar. So we grouped participants based on similar asset levels, and we oversampled significantly for women and millennials based on similar asset levels. And what's important about this is that, I believe, and I think that you probably would agree with me, that in many companies we have a distribution problem with respect to generation and to gender, and that in higher level positions, women and younger employees are underrepresented. And because we know that equity compensation grows dramatically at higher levels within the company, we felt it was important to sort of get rid of the tail on both ends of the equity participant spectrum and to really focus on sort of a population in the middle, carving out the very high end and carving out the broad base participant base, to focus on something in the middle that was more comparable. So that was our big push in our most recent research, to do this big oversampling for women and millennials in this particular segment. And I'm glad we did it, because it exposed a lot of really interesting things to us. And the first one I want to talk about is satisfaction. So we ask a question across the board. Satisfaction. How satisfied are you with your stock plans? And the good news is that 62% of the entire population is very satisfied. And we got another, almost 20% that are satisfied. So overall, we've got more than 80% of our population that is satisfied with the stock program. So that's great news. But here's the deeper level information. When we get into that oversampled population of the women and of the millennials, what we found is actually that women are outperforming their male counterparts with respect to satisfaction. Now, it's not huge, I'll admit, it's not huge, but we do see in this particular segment with similar asset levels that 67% of women are very satisfied compared to 64% of the male participants. Now, we see a little bit of a flip-flop of that story with respect to age, with 67% of the older participants being very satisfied compared to 62% of the younger participants, or the millennial generation. So here we see, nearly similar results, with one part of the population performing better than the other part with respect to satisfaction. Now, I'll tell you, we do all sorts of cuts on this stuff. We look at it by product. So we look at it by whether they are a stock option participant or a restricted stock participant or an ESPP participant. We look at it by segment. We look at all of these things. So we've got lots of different information in the background. I'll just give you two things that I think are interesting here. From a product perspective, the ESPP product appears to be highly satisfying. We actually see 66% of the ESPP population being highly satisfied. That compares to 58% of the long-term incentive population. I'll also tell you that as we look at the higher segments, the executive population, we've got higher satisfaction, with 76% of executives being highly satisfied with their plans. And that's probably because they're getting more value associated with their equity awards.
That sounds really interesting. When you looked at millennials, was there a significant breakdown or difference between the different genders there, or did you look at that or not?
So that's an excellent question, and we did not break that down by gender, although it's definitely something that I could look at. We'll have to come back and address that on the next time.
And the same kind of question would apply to execs as well, but I guess executives are probably more sort of heavily male, I'm guessing, because that's how the industry is today.
Well, I do think that you are probably pretty much spot on with that assessment. We did not have an adequate population to do a significant oversampling at that executive population. So that's why we really focused on the middle population and sort of carving out both ends.
It's like the bell curve. You're really looking at more of the center.
That's right.
The top of the hump rather than the edges that are kind of waning away. So this is really great. So what other kinds of cuts did you look at? What other kinds of things can you share with us?
Well, we looked at 6 what I call headline cuts. I'm not going to share all 6 with you, but I will say that another one that I think is interesting is motivation, because lots of plan sponsors will identify that they are granting equity compensation to attract, retain, and motivate their employees. So we're always interested in knowing, are these things motivational? So the question that we actually put forth is, I work harder knowing that my stock plan will reward me for my company's performance. So that we're asking the participants to agree with that statement. Either they are agreeing with it, they're neutral, or they're disagreeing with it. And here on the motivation category, I do think we have an opportunity to do some improvement here, because we did come up with, across the board, just slightly less than half of participants agreeing with that statement. That's 48% of participants agreeing that they are working harder because of this plan. Now, when we take a little bit of a deeper dive and go into that oversampled population for women and for millennials, again, we do see some differences. Slim differences, not major, but we are seeing women again outperforming their male counterparts, with 48% of women agreeing with it compared to 46% of men. And on the age cut, we have 48% of the older participants agreeing compared to 43% of the younger participants. So Here, I think it is important to continue to identify that there are differences based on the product that's being used, and there's differences